Hi, my dear children, good morning. Our last history class was about the role played by French women in French Revolution, the role of French women. Let us think about slavery now. What is slavery? Slavery refers to a condition in which individuals are owned by others who control where they live and at what they work, like we own the animals. There were many slaves in France during these days. What was the attitude of French society towards the slaves during Jacobin regime? Let us analyze. One of the most revolutionary social reforms of the Jacobin Club was the abolition of slavery in French colonies. France had many colonies in Caribbean islands. The colonies in Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and San Domingo were under the control of France, and these colonies were the important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. But the Europeans were not ready to go work in the distant and unfamiliar lands. They were not ready to go in those areas in order to work. But at the same time, they need the different commodities produced in these islands. This created a shortage of labor on the plantations. So, in order to solve the issue, what issue? The issue of the shortage of workers in Caribbean islands. A triangular slave trade was signed between Europe, Africa, and Americans. French merchants sailed from the ports of Bordeaux or Nantes to African coast. For what? In order to purchase the slaves. Slaves were purchased and brought to the Caribbeans. These slaves were sold to plantation owners. The exploitation of slave labor made it possible to meet the growing demand in European markets for sugar, coffee, and indigo. How was the exploitation? Go to African coast, purchase the slaves, and sell the slaves to the plantation owners. Port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owed economic prosperity to the flourishing slave trade. Throughout the 18th century, there was little criticism of slavery in France. The National Assembly held long debates about whether the rights of man should be extended to all French subjects, including those in the colonies. Though in different colonies, they are of course French citizens. But it did not pass any law. The National Assembly did not pass any laws, fearing opposition from businessmen whose income depended on the slave trade. It was finally the convention which in 1794 legislated to free all slaves in the French overseas possessions. This, however, turned out to be a short term measure. 10 years later, Napoleon reintroduced slavery. Slavery was finally abolished in French colonies in 1848. The revolution and everyday life. How did it affect the life of common civilian? The years following 1789 in France saw many changes in the lives of men, women, and children. Abolition of censorship was one of the notable change. In the old regime, all written materials and cultural activities, books, newspapers, plays, could be published or performed only after they had been approved by the censors of the king. Now, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be a natural right. Newspapers, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flooded the towns of France from where they traveled rapidly into the countryside. They all described and discussed the events and changes taking place in France. Freedom of the press also meant that the opposing views of events could be expressed. Plays, songs, and festive processions attracted large number of people. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself as the Emperor of France. He set out to conquer neighboring countries and saw himself as the modernizer. He introduced many laws such as the protection of private property and a uniform system of weights and measures. Initially, many countries saw Napoleon as a liberator, but soon they realized that he is a real invader. He was finally defeated at Waterloo in 1815. The legacy of French Revolution. The ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French Revolution. These spread from France to the rest of Europe during the 19th century. In other words, we can say that French Revolution acted as a source of inspiration to many countries in the world.